Okay, we're gonna start chapter 8 of Second Kings today, and I tell you, this chapter, at least the first part of it, had me confused because the author of Second Kings, or authors of Second Kings, takes us back to an event that we studied in chapter 4. And also, our old friend Gehazi comes back into the picture. Or was the part about Gehazi that we're gonna talk about, was that from an earlier time too? And commentaries differ on the timing of these events, and that's what was throwing me, because I was doing a lot of research trying to find uh, enough commentaries at least that would agree on whether um, they were current events in the time of Second Kings 8, or were they referring back to chapter 4, or what? So anyway, I don't know. I just couldn't get my hands wrapped around it. So take your mind back to chapter 4. Uh, it's well, let's start with this one. Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, and this happened in chapter 4, saying, "Arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for Yahweh has called for a famine, and furthermore, it will come on the land for 7 years." This is another point that I had a hard time and never did find an answer. Which famine was this talking about? Uh, if you can figure out what famine it was, then you can figure out when it was that Elisha was speaking to this lady. There's two famines that are spoken of. One is in 2 Kings 4:38. Well, there's actually three, but one of them we covered last week. 2 Kings 4:38. It says Elisha came to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land, a famine in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And if you remember, this is when the poison mushrooms got put in the pot, and uh, God uh, healed all of the prophets that had gotten sick. There's also a famine mentioned during the siege of Samaria back in chapter 6. There was a great famine in Samaria. This is the northern tribes. And behold, they besieged it till an ass's head. You remember we talked about this, and how it talked about inflation. It talked about the people eating the most unclean things that you can imagine. Uh, so we don't know if either of these famines, or neither of them, are the one with the warning for the woman who helped Elisha. Uh, it's just one of those things we don't know, because the scriptures don't tell us. Well, here are some scriptures that describe Elisha's healing from the dead son of the wealthy woman. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, and I've got a map of that here in just a second, where there was a prominent woman. Now that's one of the keys to this. This was a prominent woman. Now I don't know if prominent means wealthy, or politically, set, or what. I'm assuming maybe a little bit of both. And so she helps Elisha. She sees and recognizes a prophet of God, and she persuades him to come in and eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there. They eventually built him a room up, on their roof. And here is one of the maps. I've got, I think, 3 or 4 maps today. You can see Schumann up there. Okay, there's two lakes or seas here. The one in the north is Lake Gennesaret, or the Sea of Galilee. And you can see that Shunem is just a little bit below and west of the Sea of Galilee, and Jezreel, which was the summer palace of Ahab, is just right there. And then go on down by the R of Israel, and you'll see where Samaria is, which is the capital of Samaria. It was the city of Samaria, which is the capital of the nation of Samaria. So just to give you an idea of where we're talking about here. And taking us back to this event back in chapter 4, Elisha was asking, what can I do for this woman who feeds me and has built me a place to stay whenever I pass through? And he decided apparently to ask God to allow this woman to have a son. She was barren. And she said, she didn't really believe him. Kind of reminds us of Sarah. But the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha has said to her. But the son went out into the field. Now, this is when he was older. Apparently got a sunstroke or a heat stroke or something. And it says when he had taken him, his father, when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap till noon, and then he died. And then later on in verse 32, when Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered, Sarah and Hannah. Yeah, that's right, Rod. Thank you. So he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to Yahweh. And then he called Gehazi. Remember Gehazi? Well, this is before Gehazi messed up and ended up getting leprosy or some skin disease. He called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, take up your son. Then she went in, fell at his feet. This is when he raised the boy from the dead, or when God raised the boy from the dead. So now we pick up this story in chapter 8. So the woman arose. Now the woman has been told by Elisha, there's about to be a 7-year drought. You need to go somewhere where you can find food and water. So she arose and did according to the word of the man of God. And she took her family and sojourned in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. Now, over on the left side, you can see Philistia. This is where she went. You can see the little bitty teeny lake right here. The Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Gennesaret, however you pronounce that word. So she went down here to live in this area close to the ocean. So verse 3, it says, it came to pass that after 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. Now, remember, this was apparently a wealthy woman, had land, and she went to make an appeal to the king to get her stuff back. And this tells you that she was a woman, politically set to be able to go to the king. And she goes to the king and makes appeal for her land. Now, she's probably a widow at this time, because otherwise her husband would have gone and made the claim for their land. So she had just returned after the 7-year famine and found that her property had been appropriated by someone else. So she goes to the king. And so now our old friend Gehazi comes back in. Then the king talked with Gehazi. This is another one of the areas in this chapter that I had a hard time, still am having a hard time deciding. Not that it matters, not that God cares whether I know when this was or not. I would just kind of like to know, but this could be before Gehazi got in trouble and was given, his family leprosy, or it could be after, and the king wants someone who knows the prophet well to come in and talk to him. So it says the king, it could be either way. So the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. Now, this is one of the reasons why, to me, it seems that it's speaking of before. But there again, it doesn't matter. So the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and said, "Hey, Gehazi, tell me about Elisha." This is another reason why I think it may have been before. You would think that the king would have known some of the stuff that Elisha had done, or that God had done through Elisha. So anyway, again, it doesn't make any difference. I know I've talked about it 3 or 4 times, which I would think would be an indication that it matters to me, but I don't think in the scheme of things it matters at all. Now, this is most likely King Joram, sometimes spelled and pronounced Jehoram. So he was talking to Gehazi about Elisha when this woman came in. And the Bible Knowledge Commentary, says that they believe that it happened before. Again, I don't think it matters. But another commentary says this: Gehazi the servant, formerly Elisha's servant. The law did not forbid conversing with lepers, but only dwelling with them. Okay, so again, we don't know. We got 2 commentaries. One says it was before, one says after. Anyway. And I believe this is one of those that doesn't really matter situations. Is it important to know when this took place? I don't think so. So anyway, at any rate, Gehazi has credibility with the king. It's most likely Joram or Jehoram. And he has enough credibility that he can explain the situation. Verse 4. Oops, where'd 4 go? Yeah, I've already done 4. All right, I'm gonna back up here and put it on 4 here for a second. This is from the Bible Knowledge Commentary, and I've used the commentaries a lot today. Here's what I do with our Bible studies, and I don't know that any of you all care, but I go through the chapter and I put down all the things that I think, things that I believe, things that I think it's saying. Then I go back and I check with 3 or 4 commentaries and go back to the beginning of the chapter, and I start putting things in there that tend to give us a better idea about some things. That's just my style. Other people have other styles, but that's my style. So this is what the Bible Knowledge Commentary said. Since King Joram was talking to Gehazi when the woman called on the king, this incident must have taken place before Gehazi became a leper. Again, we don't really know. They don't really know, but this is their opinion. Joram's interest in Elisha seems to have been motivated by curiosity rather than conviction. There is no evidence that Joram ever abandoned his apostate ways, worshiping Baal, and so on. And there's no indication that he ever became a faithful follower of Yahweh. I mean, we pretty well know that didn't happen. Elisha's resuscitation of the Shunammite's son was a great event to recount. This is what Gehazi is telling the king. Amazingly, Gehazi's telling of it was interrupted by the woman herself who had come to present her request to the king. So now we get down to verse 5. Now it happened as she was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead, her son to life, that there was the woman. I'm sorry, let me back up. It happened as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life. There was the woman whose son he had restored walked in. Wow. How about some proof to the king? We all know it happened because we can read the scriptures, but the king didn't know. And so Gehazi's telling the king this story, and in walks the woman and says, yeah, it was my kid. And so when she's in there, she says, Gehazi says, this is the woman, and this is her son who must have been with her, whom Elisha restored to life. Now, again, from Expositor's commentary, as we read in chapter 4, this woman was of importance, a woman of strong resolve. She immediately determined to take her case directly to the king, to whom she was going when she happened. In other words, she was on her way there while Gehazi was talking to the king. And so God had so arranged the details of life that Gehazi could identify the woman and so aid in the verification of her claim. And she in turn would be living proof of Gehazi's account of Elisha's mighty deeds. This one in particular was raising her son from the dead. And the king acceded to her request. He gave her land back. Verse 6. When the king asked the woman, she told him the story. So the king appointed a certain officer for her, saying, restore all that was hers and all the proceeds of the field from the day that she left the land until now. And now, one of the things that we're going to see in this chapter, it's almost like I wrote it because there's no segues. It's just, it goes, we're talking about this, and all of a sudden, we bounce. Oh, I'm sorry. No, okay, wait a minute. I'll come back to that. Where's verse 7? I left verse 7 out. So I shall read verse 7 to you. Then Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, was sick. And it was told him, saying, the man of God has come here. Now, we don't know if God sent Elisha to Damascus or if he was going that way anyway. But if Elisha was near Samaria, which you can see by the lower area there, a trip to Damascus would be about 125 miles, and it'd take more than a week to walk there. And Damascus, of course, as it says here, is the capital of Syria, where the king would be. And verse 7 that I forgot to put in there, Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, was sick. And it was told him, the man of God has come here. So, the king's probably wondering why he's up there also. But it's interesting to me that the king of Syria, and it's also called Aram, if you remember, was not a good guy, was not a worshiper of Yahweh. He was a worshiper of many gods, and the gods of Damascus, the Baals or the Baals. But I think it's interesting that the king of Syria would recognize the prophet of God and want his judgment. In verse 8 says, and the king said to Hazael. Now, Hazael is going to be an important character in a minute. He was a high-ranking servant of the king. And so the king told Hazael, take a present in your hand and go meet the man of God and ask him to ask Yahweh, am I going to live? Well, it appears that Hazael was a trusted official of Ben-Hadad II, by the way, at this particular time, who was king of Syria. In actuality, he was the anointed king of Syria yet to rule. If you remember, way back when Elijah anointed Hazael king of Syria, he anointed Jehu, and he anointed Elisha to be the prophet to follow him. Now, I don't think I put those verses in there, but we did study those. Hopefully, you'll remember some of it. So this guy Hazael has already been anointed to be king of Syria. This is not good news to Ben-Hadad, the existing king of Syria. So he had been anointed king by Elijah years before, along with Jehu and Elisha. One was anointed to be a prophet of God, the other two to kill and pillage, which we'll get into a little bit later. Also, Elisha was anointed to be both prophet and the sword of God. Because in 1 Kings 19, going back to that point, Yahweh said to Elijah, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. Okay, so Elijah was up there. And when you come, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Now, this is Elijah. He hadn't been taken to wherever God took him to, save him from being killed. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall you anoint to be prophet in your room. In other words, in your place, later on, down the road. And it shall come to pass, and this is something we're going to cover a little bit more here in a minute. It shall come to pass that him that escapes the sword of Hazael, in other words, he's going to be going out killing people, killing the family, but we'll get into that later. But him that escapes the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. So Elisha was a sword carrying prophet. Now this is about 842 BC, because that's when Hazael began to reign. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right, but now we're going to bounce back to 2 Kings. See what I mean? It's a lot of fun going back and forth. It can be a little confusing to me, maybe not to you all. So Hazael went to meet Elisha and took a gift in his hand. I thought that was interesting. He took a gift in his hand. 40 camel loads he took in his hand. I love the way that the author phrased that. Even every good thing of Damascus, 40 camel loads. And he came and stood before Elisha and said, your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, will I recover from this sickness? Now, here's where it gets very interesting. Because some deniers of the scripture probably say, well, see, looky here, God lied to him. God had Elisha lie. Well, no, that's not exactly what happened. You could look at it that way, but not if you look deeply. So in verse 10, Elisha said, go say to Ben-Hadad, yeah, you're going to recover. However, Yahweh has shown me that he will really die. Now, let me explain something here. Elisha knows something that we don't know at this point. Elisha knows what Hazael is going to do. He knows that Hazael is going to kill the king and then kill a whole bunch of other people, because when he kills Ben-Hadad, he's going to become king. So Elisha's being a little ambiguous here, because Elisha knows what's going to happen. So, yes, the king's going to recover, but Hazael's going to kill him. So, yes and no. And so God's not lying here. He just knows both the beginning and the end of what's going on here. As far as the sickness is concerned, Hazael was going to recover, but he wasn't going to live, because Hazael was going to kill him. So in verse 10, Elisha said to him, "Go say to him, yeah, you're going to recover." But then he tells Hazael, "However, Yahweh has shown me that he will really die." So I don't know if that's making any sense, but that's the way I understand it. It makes it a lot easier to understand. So Hazael dutifully carried out his master's instructions, and he went to Elisha. And Elisha's reply to Hazael, this is, by the way, from expositors, was an ambiguous one. The answer to the king's question was both yes and no. Yes, you're going to recover, but no, you're not going to live, because this guy's going to kill you. Yes, if left to normal circumstances of healing, the king would recover. And no, Elisha, who was at that moment anointing Hazael as king, this is apparently a second time, he knew that this treacherous man would use the king's illness to effect his coup d'etat. Accordingly, Hazael could testify truthfully to the king, yeah, you're going to recover from the disease. But he didn't tell him he was going to kill him. The illness was not a fatal one of itself. Elisha's reply, an icy stare, which we'll come to in the next scripture, indicate that Hazael had already plotted the king's demise through the situation, and that Elisha knew this. He knew his secret thoughts. God had given him his secret thoughts. And so Hazael blushed in shame when Elisha set his countenance in a stare. He just stared at him until Hazael figured out, this guy knows what I'm going to do. And he was ashamed. And Elisha wept. Now, you remember when Jesus wept, it's surmised that he did because he knew what was about to happen to his people when Rome invaded in 70 AD. And it looks like this is a similar situation. Verse 12. Hazael said, hey, Elisha, why are you crying? What's got you so upset? And Elisha said, because I know the evil that you will do to the children of Israel. This is the northern tribes, remember. Their strongholds you'll set on fire. Their young men you will kill with the sword. You will dash their children and rip open their women with child. I don't even want to think about those two things. So Hazael said, well, what do you think I am, a dog? You think I'll do this kind of stuff? And Elisha answered, Yahweh has shown me that you will become king over Syria. And implied in that is, yeah, you're going to do this stuff. So God is about to use Hazael to punish the northern tribes because of their idolatry and refusal to worship the true God. I mean, this has been going on since the split. We're a couple of 100 years in. I'm throwing that number out, but I think that's about right. We're a couple of 100 years past the death of David. So Hazael goes and tells the king this exact stuff. Hey, everything's fine. No problem. You'll recover and continue to reign, knowing that he's about to smother the king to death and reign in his place. He departed from Elisha, came to his master, who said, well, what did he say? And he answered, well, he told me you would surely recover. But the very next day, he took a thick cloth, dipped it in water, and spread it over his face and smothered him so that he died. And Hazael reigned in his place. Okay, now, another non-segue, a subject change, and a confusing one at that. This one, hang on to your hats. We're about to run into two kings named Joram. One reigns in the north and one reigns in the south. So at this point, which is one of the few times that we come across comments about the south, almost everything we've studied so far, because all of these non-writing prophets were from the north. Verse 16, now in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, the king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, having been king of Judah. Okay, so, I mean, they're throwing something in here. So, okay, hold it. 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, is the northern tribes. And then Jehoshaphat is the king of the southern tribes. It says, having been king of Judah. Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, began to reign as king of Judah. The 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, was about 847 BC. And I don't think any of these years really mean much to us they're not, great historians. This is when Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, began to reign in Jerusalem. He's not a good guy. Now, I don't really feel sorry for Joram, but he really didn't have a chance to be a good guy. He was a terrible king. Why? Look at who he was married to, who his mother-in-law and father-in-law were. He was married to the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. His mother-in-law was Jezebel. His father-in-law was Ahab. And of course he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, not in the way of the kings, at least the good ones, of Judah. Now, one point to remember, and as I say, this can get very, very confusing. For 7 or 8 years, if I remember right, Joram ruled Judah while Jehoshaphat was away fighting. He wasn't the king, but it's counted in his term. So the 5th year of Joram of Israel was the year the other Joram began his reign in Judah, and it was after Jehoshaphat died. And Joram of Judah reigned for 13 years total, but I'm sorry, I forgot the hiccups, but only 8 as the sole ruler. 5, he was a joint ruler, if you will. He was the Secretary of State, let's say. He was in charge while Jehoshaphat was out fighting. Is this confusing enough? You want me to confuse all of us a little bit more? Joram's father was good King Jehoshaphat, but his wife was Athaliah, daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And the evil from Ahab's daughter influenced Joram more than the good from Jehoshaphat. And this is so typical. I've given you an example before. You all may have a river or 2 rivers near you that join together. We have around Pocahontas, we have 2 rivers, the Black River, which is a dirty brown, and Current River, which is almost crystal clear. When they join, what happens to the crystal clearness of Current River? It turns a muddy brown. And that may be a bad analogy, but that's what happens here. The bad overrules the good. Okay, so Joram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. Remember, he reigned 13 overall. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Whoa, 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 whoa. This guy's the king of Jerusalem, king of Judah, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just like Ahab. Why? For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of Yahweh. But strangely enough, God is still patient with Judah. However, in about 120 years, he's going to remove his protection, but we'll get into that down the road. And he'll allow Assyria to conquer them and take the people away. Verse 19, it says, yet Yahweh would not destroy Judah. He was still patient with them for the sake of his servant David, as he promised him to give him a lamp to him and his sons forever. Now, another change of subject. Remember Edom? They revolted against the northern tribes earlier, and now they're revolting against Judah. They had already revolted against the northern tribes. Now they're going to revolt against Judah. David had levied a tax on Edom, and it was still on there. And in where did this come from? Okay, this is talking about when David had laid the levy of tax on them. 8:20. In his day, Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. This is over when Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, is reigning in Judah. Now, the writer of 2 Kings, or the writers of 2 Kings, mentioned only two of the unfortunate events that marked the reign of Joram. One that was not included was his slaughter of his 6 brothers, all sons of Jehoshaphat. And you all may remember that. We covered that, 3 or 4 weeks ago. This purge seems to have been Athaliah's idea, since no other Judean king practiced such a thing, but Athaliah herself did when she ruled. She wiped out everybody that was in her way. She tried to wipe out the whole dynasty of David, but one of the children, I believe that was Jehu, was hidden away. Now let's jump up to the same events in Chronicles. It says, now when Joram had, see how they spelled Jehoram there? It can be spelled Jeoram, Joram, 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 or Jehoram. But when Jehoram had taken over the kingdom of his father, he killed all his brothers with the sword, and some of the rulers of Israel also. And Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And because of who his in-laws were and who his wife was, he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab did, for Ahab's daughter was his wife. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Sometimes you have to jump between Chronicles and 2 Kings to get the whole story. Yet Yahweh was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he had made with David. And since he had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. In verse 8 in, I've got to catch up in my notes here. In verse 8 in 2nd Chronicles, in his day, Edom revolted against the rule of Judah, the southern tribes, and set up a king over themselves. Then Joram crossed over with his commanders and all his chariots with him. And he arose by night and struck down the Edomites who were surrounding him and the commanders of the chariots. So Edom revolted against Judah to this day. That's to the time of the writing of 2nd Chronicles. Then Libnah revolted at the same time against his rule because he had forsaken Yahweh Elohim of his fathers. Now, the writers of Chronicles continue with this about Joram, king of Judah. Now, this Joram, remember, is the king of Judah that we're talking about. He said, moreover, and these are some of the things that he did in the south. Moreover, he made high places in the mountains of Judah and caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot and led Judah astray. Does that sound familiar? You remember a guy named Jeroboam? This is exactly what Jeroboam did. Then a letter, and this is one of the interesting things. You know, so many Christians believe Elijah was taken up into the heavens. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's a post office up there. A letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, thus says Yahweh Elohim of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, and the ways of Asa, king of Judah. These are two of the good kings of Judah, but have walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and there weren't any good kings up there. And you've caused Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot, in other words, to worship pagan idols and little Elohims, as the house of Ahab played the harlot. And you've also killed your brothers, your own family, who were better than you. Behold, here's what's about to happen to you, my friend. Yahweh's going to strike your people, your sons, your family, your sons, your wives, all your possessions with a great calamity. And then here's something that's in Chronicles that's not written in 2 Kings. You're going to suffer severe sickness. You're going to have a disease of your bowels until your bowels come out because of the sickness. I don't know if that's literal or not, but anyway, day by day, then Yahweh stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs who bordered the Ethiopians, and they came against Judah and invaded it and carried away all the possessions found in the king's house, together with his sons and his wives, so that no son was left to him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. And then it says, so after all this, Yahweh smote him in his bowels with an incurable sickness. Now it came about in the course of time, at the end of 2 years, that his bowels came out. Again, I don't know if that's literal or not, because of his sickness, and he died in great pain. And his people made no fire for him like the fire of his fathers. Normally, when a king of Judah died, big celebration, big honor, but Joram got none of that. Verse 20, it says he was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned for 8 years, and he departed with no one's regret. That is not something that we once said about us. And they buried him in the city of David, however, not in the tombs of the kings. Okay, now back to 2 Kings. Then Joram crossed over to Zair and all his chariots with him. And this is kind of an afterthought. And he arose by night and struck the Edomites who had surrounded him. And then it talks about there's revolt against Israel, all that time. Verse 23, down here below. Now the rest of the acts of Joram, all that he did, are they not written in this missing book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? It'd be great to have that book, but God has not blessed us with that. So Joram rested with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. But remember, 2 Chronicles told us he was, I'll put it in my words, he was buried across town. Maybe even in a pauper's grave. Then Ahaziah, his son, reigned in his place. So now we're moving on to another subject. We got another king here, Ahaziah, who was another nasty king. He was the grandson of Ahab. Now we're back in the north. Now we've moved from the south. We've moved up to the north. Now here's what the Bible Knowledge Commentary says. It reminds us of something that we may have forgotten, and that is that there were two different King Ahaziahs. It says Ahaziah of Israel should not be confused with Ahaziah of Judah. They were two different kings. Each ruled only 1 year, and their reigns did not coincide. So they each only lived to reign 1 year, but it wasn't at the same time. Ahaziah of Judah, the southern tribes, reigned during the last year of Joram, the king of Israel. His reign commenced while he was 22 years old when his father Joram died. And we got two Jorams and we got two Ahaziahs. His mother was Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. She was the granddaughter of Omri. I mean, this family didn't have a chance. There was so much evil being passed from generation to generation. But influenced by his evil mother, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, he followed the wicked ways of his ancestors in the northern kingdom. So we've got Judah now is turning into the northern kingdoms because of what their kings have done, like what Jeroboam did. They have led the people astray. All right, verse 25. In the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, so we're back in the north, king of Israel, Ahaziah, the son of Joram, king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, so they throw both of them in here in the same sentence. It was in the 12th year of Joram, the king of the northern tribes, that Ahaziah, the son of Joram, king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, everybody with me? Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. He only reigned 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And I know I've said that ad nauseum, but it's repeated many, many times. But he walked in the way of the house of Ahab. Now, he's a northern king. Of course he did. And he did evil in the sight of Yahweh, like the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. Wait a minute, we may be in the south. See what I mean? It's hard to keep up with all of this. Yeah, we're in the south. Excuse me. Sorry about that. 2 Chronicles 22. Guess what? I know you'll be shocked, but he did evil in the sight of Yahweh like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors. Think about this. The counselors of the king were Ahab's people. it says after the death of his father, to his destruction. You know, what else would you expect from a king married to the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel? And of course, he walked in the way of the terrible kings of the north. Now,
Look,
yeah,
the deep state is nothing new under the sun. It existed back then. Interesting.
you're right. That's a good point.
That's exactly the same thing I was thinking about. How many of these higher ups have relationships with each other? They're the sons of the worst are friends together, and then they, it's all intermixed, and it's no wonder they act the same way.
Yeah, kings come and go, but the oligarchy just keeps on chugging along. No wonder.
You know, not wanting to get a big political discussion going, so please don't. But when we used to go to Washington when I was in the savings and loan business, and we'd go call on our senators and congressmen and, just, I guess, I don't know, let them know we were alive or something. But after an election, their staffs would change. But their staff, the people would stay the same. They would just move over. The staff of David Pryor, Democrat, would move over and work for a Republican senator or congressman, and that's what I call the bureaucracy. That's why all this stuff is happening. It's the same people. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, that's it. I don't want to get us thrown off.
Well, it's not thrown off. You're reading it here in the scripture. It says right there, they were his counselors. After the death of his father, nothing changed. They're the same. They stayed, the kings changed, but the counselors stay the same. And that's indicative of the reason that evil just remained from on high. It never changed.
And this is the value, I like Michael's comment. This is the value of the scripture. It helps us to understand principles that you see repeated again and again and again. And we should, just like some of these undoubtedly promised great and wonderful things to the people of Israel or the people of Judah, that when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, something else happened and they were influenced by values that were not as altruistic.
Right. Yeah, and you all are right. It's, there's nothing new under the sun. This is the same stuff that's happening today. Exactly the same stuff. So thanks. I'm glad you all added that. Okay, now another commentary, and I know Michael's not wild about commentaries. I use them a lot because they give me a little bit more understanding as I'm going through this. You all please understand, when I first start reading a chapter, I'm just reading it and I'm trying to filter through what's going on. And it's not until I start looking at some of the commentaries that I get a good grasp of what's going on. And this is a good example right here. 2 Chronicles 22:4. If it hadn't been for a commentary, I wouldn't have picked up on that, and we would have been still talking about 2 Kings. So, there's stuff that you can find all over the Bible, but it sure does help if you've got a good Bible software, doesn't it, Mark? Where you can find this stuff. All right, so here's what Expositor's commentary says. This new king, Ahaziah II, was under the pagan spell. Oh, I'm sorry, I get the hiccups. Ahaziah II was under the pagan spell of wicked Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, and perpetuated the Baalism that his father had fostered in the south. Likewise, at the first opportunity, he joined Ahab's son Joram in renewed hostilities with the Syrians in Ramoth Gilead. These guys worked together all the time. They were buddies. They were drinking buddies. Every Sunday afternoon they'd sit down and have them a beer. I'm being a little facetious, but you all get my point. It says, once more the battle went badly for Israel and Judah. Because guess what? God wasn't with them. They're out there on their own. It went badly for Israel and Judah, for in that battle, now this is where some stuff's about to happen. Joram was sorely wounded and returned to Jezreel for rest and recovery from his wounds. Now, thank you for saying he returned to Jezreel, because that tells us he's the king of the north. Otherwise, we got two kings with the same name. And the chapter ends with a concerned Ahaziah going to visit Joram in Jezreel. He's going up there to visit what should be the enemy, what should be someone worshiping the pagan Elohim, instead of staying in the south and getting around people who are worshiping the true God. But he would not return to Jerusalem alive. Now, we're not going to get into that today. Verse 28. Now he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Hazael. Remember him? King of Syria. So he's taken over by now. He killed his boss. He fought at Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Joram. Then King Joram went back to Jezreel, to the north, to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him. At Ramah, when he fought against Hazael, king of Syria. And Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah. Okay, so we got a wounded Joram, king of the north, and then the nephew, Ahaziah, the king of the south, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick. Now, we're going to read about Jehu in chapter 9, who killed Joram and went about killing just about everybody. But that's for another time. So that's it. I hope some of this made a little bit of sense. More thoughts, comments? I enjoyed, once I finally figured out what's going on in this chapter, I really enjoyed putting this thing together.
I Skip, I think that one of those timelines might be helpful to wrap our heads around who was who and which house they were and what, it would be kind of a guide to, oh, this guy's Judah, this guy's Israel, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a
vision thing.
You want me to find one right now?
Well, I might, since our minds are hit, if you've got one handy, it might.
I do. Do I have one online? We will see. I mean, I'm looking at one, but you all can't see it, of course. Let's see. We want to go with timeline of, let's say Israel and Judah. Timeline of Israel. Let's try this one. They're not really side by side, but we've been through all of these guys. There's Jehoshaphat, so it doesn't take long to get up to where we are. And his son Jehoram reigned from 848 BC, and then Ahaziah, which we just read about, and then Ahab's daughter. And we'll stop there and go to the, you know what, that's
Israel's the second column.
yeah, over here, you mean?
No, the second column.
Oh, here. Oh, I'm
From-
sorry. Yeah, my brain is a little bit scrambled. All right, so let's come down. What? Start with like Jehoshaphat. That's kind of where. Well, let's start with Ahab. Ahab reigned while Asa, who reigned quite a while in the south, and you had all of these kings. Of course, they assassinated each other. These guys, you know, in here, Zimri and Baasha and Elah and Omri, they all killed each other. So they didn't reign very long. So then we have good King Jehoshaphat comes along right after Ahab, and he's ruling in Judah while Ahaziah and Joram are reigning in the north in Israel. Then the other Joram, notice the difference in spelling. I think they just do that so we can tell them apart. I just spell both of them Joram. But while Joram is the king in the north, okay, Ken, good to see you. Joram and Ahaziah reigned in the south. Is this what you're looking for, Mark? Is that helping?
Well, it's helpful. I mean, it's just different than.
Hey, Skip. I mean, with the different spellings, it would be two different names, don't you think? It would be like Joram and Jehoram.
Yeah, but both of them are spelled like Jehoram, and both of them are spelled like Joram. As you're going through the.
I just sent you another one.
Okay, well, good. That'll probably be better.
I don't know. It's just different. It's more graphical rather than text.
Okay, you want to take a shot at this one?
Well, I would just say the yellow is king of Israel, and the green is kings of Judah. So if you look vertically, you can see how those kings cross each other and why they're somewhat confusing. Now, this doesn't identify that family and sons-in-laws and all that sort of thing, but those two charts, those two timelines going left to right, and then you've got the prophets in between them, and you see where Jehu is a crossover. Elijah crosses over, and so does Elisha. And then the kings of Judah are below. So you kind of see how they're all intermingled. And you also see the name, some of the name confusion too.
Yeah. Why is it torn there in the middle? I'm looking to see if I can find a reason.
I don't know.
So they could fit in an 8.5 by 11.
I think it's different.
Could
Yeah,
be
it's different pages in a book.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's exactly the same the same time is this on each side. So yeah. I think you're right.
You can fold it up, and yeah,
right.
That makes sense.
And then you've got the kings of other, the kings of the nations around Israel are in red, and So even the prophets are categorized. You see the chart is at the bottom right.
Yeah, one of the things that has caught my attention as we've gone through this is that almost every one of the prophets that we've studied so far has been from the north. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but
God's going to send someone from the south to go to the north. We'll get into that when you get into the writing. But when you look at this chart, what I find most fascinating at all these charts and trying to wrap your mind around all these kings and who was in charge of what, and the laying for the blame of all the wickedness that befell both nations. None of this, as you're looking at this chart, this was not God's intention for his people Israel. None of this should happen. This was not God's intention from the beginning. This was all the result of a people saying, we want a king.
that's
just something that came to my mind as I'm looking at all this confusion.
Well, even after that, when God said, "Okay, you want a king? Then let's have a king that's going to worship me," and you look all the way over to the left at the top, and you see Solomon, and we know that's where the big problem started, and he induced the problems, which was exacerbated by his servant Jeroboam, who split off the 12 tribes because of high taxes.
Right.
Remember, that's where it came from, high taxes.
Yep.
That's also how we became a nation. Just an FYI, parallels, they're there.
Okay, I'm glad you sent that, Mark. This is easier to read than any of the ones that I have.
Well, it kind of helps reconcile which house you're talking about and who was who at when you're going through some of that. It's not specific to Kings, the book of Kings, or the book of books of Chronicles. Just has the people.
Yeah, and another thing that really jumps out at you is look how many kings that Israel had, and then how many kings that Judah had. You can see how much longer Judah lasted before God allowed Babylon to come in and take them over. But the Assyrians, well, it says 718 to 709. I'll take the years, whatever they say. I'm not going to argue with them about that. But you're right. But this is good. Let's see. How would I do that? I could put this in a GoToMeeting when I send it out next week. What do you think, Mark? Would that?
No, that's not going to work because you're not going to be here next week.
That is right. I'm not going to be here next week. Well, I could do it week after that.
Well, you'll be here, but you might not. You're not leading.
Yeah. I think I'll be here. I hope I'll be here. Let me put it that way. I hope it's just one night in the hospital.
You could send this at any time. You could send it after the Bible study's over if you want, or post it, or whatever.
Well, that's true. The reason
List.
I was hesitating, Michael and I both, or I did, had problems being able to send things to a big group more than once, but I think I can do it now. So I'll do that as soon as we finish. I'll send that to everybody.
Also, you're recording, so this is actually full screen on everyone's When this gets uploaded to the archives, you're going to see this map and all of its wonderful glory as we see
All
it
of its
right here.
glories. Yep. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? I wish now that I had shown this at the beginning and you all could have all printed it out, but I didn't. But I'm glad you sent it to me, Mark. All right. Let me go back. There we go.
Skip.
Yeah.
Oh, can you go back to the chart again?
Sure.
Sorry. It's interesting to know, if you look over in the key, it says that all of these events were apparently over a time frame of well, it says 904. Oh, I see what it is. That's the starting date, 940 years BC. Yeah. So that's at the top of the timeline, 940.
Yeah.
So, but it gives you a good idea. You know, this is over several hundred years. And we're down to Jehu, and we're at 120 years. All that stuff that we've gone through, 120 years, approximately.
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
And if you look at the chart, if you look at the key and you look at the chart, look what you find. It says you look at the prophets, the ones that they have two blue bars. Those are the non-writing prophets, which we've been studying now for almost the better part of the year. And then it shows you the writing prophets and where they come in according to the key in the timeline. So Jonah would be the first one. They would be one of the writing prophets. And what's interesting is he's a prophet sent to the nations. That's very interesting, as opposed to a prophet being sent to Israel or Judah. Very interesting.
Yeah, he went to Nineveh, which was a Gentile city, but then Amos is the first one to go to Israel.
Right. He went to Israel and he was from the south. So it's very interesting how God works.
Yeah, I bet you we could find a whole lot of interesting stuff in this. I see Babylonian Empire, see Nebuchadnezzar down there right in the center, Belshazzar. Evil Merodach. That's an interesting name. Okay. Anyone else? I've enjoyed this. I really enjoyed putting it together. So, and Michael's going to take care of next Sabbath. He's got everybody's email address. If you're new though, you might want to send him a just in case, in case, because I usually try to send them to Mike I try to send them to Michael. If you all send me one, you've got stars, I suppose, Michael.
Yeah, I have her. I don't think I have her as part of the group for the online, but I'll go back and make sure I add her.
Okay.
But by the way, just an FYI, folks, the access code to get on to GoToMeeting that got you here today is exactly the same every single week. So if for some reason next week you don't get an email invitation, don't panic. You can still get on. You just type in the same exact code that you got from Skip from today, and it'll get you on for next week. Just if you can remember that in the back of your minds. If for some reason there's a technical snafu or you don't get an email, doesn't mean that services have been canceled. It just means that just go into today's email, find Skip's invitation, copy the link and the code, and you can get right back on. It stays the same every week. Every Sabbath, the link and the code is the same.
Yeah, it's the number's right there, 898-655-469.
I did get a late prayer request, came on from Prasad. I just thought I'd mention it. He's saying that he is requesting prayers for his wife Anusha and his older son Shemi Michael. Both are suffering from severe fever and bad cramps. And just a reminder that in that part of India, that kind of sickness can become serious and deadly very quickly. He doesn't, not sure what it is that he has, but they're in bad shape. So just keep them in prayer because sickness is bad juju in that part of the world.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
I was just curious about with Prasad and everything, and their because Christianity is not as common in India. How open can they be about their when they meet and being Christian, Michael?
Yeah, the answer to that is, as Prasad would say to all of us, we must do or die, Daddy. They literally rely on Yahweh's protection, but the fact remains they're less than 2% of the population of 1.4 billion. Less than 2% of the Indian population is Christian, and the vast majority of those are Roman Catholic. So, as far as Protestant or Sabbatarian Christians, I mean, you're talking less than 1/100% of Christianity, but they're being to practice Christianity open usually earns instantaneous persecution. They have to go somewhere on ground that no one can hear them or see them because the Hindus get offended. So there's a piece of land that was purchased for them about 12 years ago where they built a steel building now, and it's between the villages of Lanka and Rajapalayam. It's in the middle of a bunch of rice fields between the two villages, and that's where they now have to go to have worship and to keep the feast, because if they have religious services in the villages, usually the local Hindu leaders will get a mob and start trouble. And Prasad has that problem in Rajarapeta quite a bit. So they don't have the freedom that we do as far as being able to just, show up somewhere and have a Bible study or something like that, especially considering that in India, music is an essential part of any worship service. Unlike here in the United States, where we prefer like a Bible study or just a talk, in India, it has to accompany with instruments and music, because that's how understanding is retained. And that drives the Hindus crazy, because they have their own music that they blast via loudspeaker and make sure everyone hears their God's music. Does that answer your question a little bit, or are you looking for another specific answer, Gene?
It does some. Are they like physically in danger, or do they just get yelled at, or
No, both. No, they're physically in danger. Like when they go to do a baptism, Erica can tell you this. They go in a procession and they carry Bibles and they sing psalms while they're walking to the river canals. And the river canals belong to Hindu gods. So when the Hindus see them walking, they know what they're going to do, and they'll throw bricks at them, try to hit them upside the head with a brick, or cause trouble, get a mob started. It happens all the time.
Wow.
Yeah, they're persecuted. Yeah, Erica, you had a thought? Your mic's on.
I was just going to say that sometimes they do a lot of song and singing, because a lot of times people can remember more when you're singing a song. Even us here, when you hear a song, you can remember more. And so many of them are illiterate, so to have an actual sit-down Bible study is very difficult for them, and they don't understand. So if they teach through song, it absorbs better, and they understand and learn. But as far as persecution, yes, they can physically be thrown in jail, beaten, even killed.
Yeah, and it's perfectly legal to do that. If a Christian's killed, then they're not really human, so there's no police investigation. No one's arrested for it because a Christian. It's okay, and that's how it is there.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody want to throw something out? Okay. Jill, would you mind closing today?
Heavenly Father, we come before you on this Sabbath day, very grateful for the day of rest, the day that you set aside that reminds us to take time out of our busy lives and connect with you and connect with one another. Thank you for the instruction and the understanding that we have gained in this study going through this. Sometimes it seems far removed from our present lives and the stress that we're under, but it doesn't mean that it is not good to understand and to see the history and to know how you have worked with your people throughout the many generations. We know you have a purpose for all of this, and you have a purpose for us. We ask that you'll help us, each and every one of us, with our individual journeys with you and along this journey of life, that you'll guide our thoughts and direct our hearts to always seek your wisdom and your way. We thank you for this Sabbath, and we ask your blessing on each and every one of us. And we look forward to being back again next week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. One other prayer request. I know Mark and Jill's kids are going to be driving up from Texas, right? It's the ones in Texas. So pray for safe travel for them. And okay, I guess that's it. Hopefully I can be online. I hope I'm not still in the hospital. It should be an overnight, should be a fairly simple procedure. So I plan to be here. I just don't plan to do much talking. So anyway, thanks for everybody, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Skip.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Happy Sabbath.
Bye.